The great lumina chamber of the galactic concordance was a place of profound silence, a silence designed to hold the weight of 1,000 worlds and the memories of 10,000 generations. Its walls were not built, but grown from living crystal, which pulsed with a soft, internal light that mirrored the heartbeats of the delegates assembled within. High above, suspended in the chamber's core, floated the singular object of their governance and their greatest, most persistent fear, the grand stellar cartography, a perfect, shimmering hologram of the known galaxy. It was a testament to their collective knowledge, a web of hyperlanes and star systems meticulously plotted over eons, a monument to the triumph of reason over the void. And yet, it was a lie. In the Orion arm, nestled amidst a cluster of otherwise unremarkable stars, there was a void, a hole, a patch of absolute, deliberate blackness where the map simply stopped. It was not an unexplored region, for the tendrils of concordance sensor nets brushed its edges. It was a consciously omitted space, a cartographical scar. This was human space, and in the 10 millennia since the concordance's founding, no one had ever officially asked why it remained unmapped. The reason was a truth too heavy for formal inquiry. Elder Kalen of the Cathar, his chitinous form reflecting the soft glow of the chamber, stood upon his designated dais, his multifaceted eyes fixed upon that unnerving emptiness. His people were historians, archivists of the galaxy's long and often painful memory. They forgot nothing, and it was this burden of memory that made the void so terrifying. He could feel the anxious energy radiating from the other delegates. The Glyptons, amorphous beings of living stone, remained impassive, but their gravitational fields fluctuated with subtle disquiet. The Vorlag, a young and volatile species whose metallic carapaces bristled with barely contained aggression, radiated impatience. It was their agitation that had brought them all to this precipice. A stellar nursery at the galaxy's edge, a place of immense energy and creation, was collapsing prematurely. The resulting wave of exotic radiation, a null cascade, was propagating inward, extinguishing stars and rendering entire sectors uninhabitable. Its projected path was a dagger aimed at the heart of the concordance, and the only viable route for a mass evacuation, a route that could save countless billions, lay directly through that silent, uncharted darkness. "The path is clear," declared Highclaw Vorlag, his voice a grating scrape of metal on metal. He gestured a sharpened appendage toward the hologram. "The energies of the cascade will follow the densest gravitational pathways. The human void offers a shortcut, a bypass for our fleets. We must petition them for passage, and if they refuse, we will force it. Their reclusiveness cannot be allowed to doom us." The chamber murmured, a low thrum of 100 different physiologies reacting to the audacity of the statement. To speak of forcing passage through human space was a blasphemy of the highest order, a violation of the unspoken protocol that had governed the galaxy for ages. Kalen felt a cold dread seep into his thoughts, a feeling ancient and familiar. He remembered the old texts, the ones sealed in the deepest archives, the ones forbidden to all but the Elder Council. They did not speak of humans as enemies or as monsters. They spoke of a cognitive shadow and an event known only as the Silent Requiem. "Highclaw, your species is young." Kalen's voice was calm, resonant, carrying the weight of his long years. "You see a shortcut. We see a boundary that was established not by treaty or by threat, but by a sorrow so profound it has stained the very fabric of space-time. We do not know what lies in that space because our ancestors, after one attempt, made a unanimous decision to forget, to cease looking, to leave that map blank." "Sorrow does not sterilize planets, Elder," Vorlag countered, his words sharp with contempt for what he perceived as archaic superstition. "Our sensor probes, the most advanced in the galaxy, report nothing from that region. No energy signatures, no fleet movements, no communications. It is empty. A primitive, isolationist race clinging to a patch of darkness. Are the lives of trillions to be weighed against the privacy of one reclusive species?" The debate raged, a storm of logic, fear, and political posturing. The younger races, born in an era of relative peace and technological supremacy, saw the problem in purely logistical terms, an obstacle to be overcome. The older races, the Cathar, the Glyptons, the silent, ethereal lumina who had built the chamber itself, knew better. They understood that not all voids were empty. Some were full, overflowing with a presence that defied conventional measurement. They remembered, in fragments and whispers, the fate of the Xylos theocracy, the last civilization to attempt a comprehensive mapping of that region. Their expedition, a fleet of their finest cartographical vessels, had simply vanished, not destroyed but erased. One moment they were transmitting data, charting new worlds with jubilant pronouncements, and the next their transmissions ceased. When a rescue fleet arrived weeks later, they found nothing. No wreckage, no energy signatures, no distress beacons. But that was not the most terrifying part. The archives of the Xylos themselves began to corrupt. Their historical records started to show that the mapping expedition had never been launched. The crew members were listed as having died in training accidents years prior. The star drives developed for the mission were recorded as failed prototypes. Within a single generation, the Xylos theocracy had no memory of ever having had an interest in the Orion arm. They had been edited. A civilization, pruned from the vine of history, and the galaxy had instinctively recoiled, averting its gaze in a collective act of self-preservation. The humans have never shown aggression, a silken, telepathic voice filled the chamber. It was the owner of the Lumina, her form a mere shimmer of light in the chamber's high galleries. They have never expanded. They have never made demands. They have only ever maintained their silence. Is it not the height of arrogance to assume that silence is a sign of weakness, rather than a sign of a burden we cannot comprehend? A burden, Highclaw Vorlag scoffed. Or a bluff, a grand deception by a minor power to hoard resources. Perhaps their worlds are jewels beyond our imagining, and this fear is the wall they have built to protect their greed. The null cascade is not a philosophical problem. It is a physical reality. It is coming. We must act. Kalen stepped forward, his form casting a long shadow over the glowing dais. He knew that logic alone would not sway the Vorlag or their growing faction of pragmatists. He had to appeal to something deeper, to the shared trauma that lay dormant in the Concordance's subconscious. He accessed his private data slate, projecting a small, simple image next to the grand galactic map. It was a single line of text, translated from the archaic dialect of the first Concordance founders. "This is the only official record from the Xylos incident," Kalen said, his voice low and solemn. "It was the final, corrupted data packet received from their lead cartographer's vessel before it was erased. It is classified under the highest security protocol, Omen of Unbeing. I have been authorized by the Elder Council to share it now, in the hope that it imparts the gravity you seem to be missing." The chamber fell utterly silent. The text shimmered in the air, its letters stark against the darkness. It did not contain tactical data or pleas for help. It was just 5 words. "The map is a mercy." A chill, profound, and absolute swept through the Lumina chamber. The fluctuating gravity fields of the Glyptons stabilized into a pattern of pure, rigid dread. Even Highclaw Vorlag seemed to recoil, his metallic carapace losing some of its aggressive sheen. The words were meaningless on their own, yet in the context of what followed, they were an epitaph for a species that had looked too closely into the dark. They had not been warned away. They had been pitied. "The humans did not destroy the Xylos," Kalen continued, letting the weight of the moment settle. "They tried to save them by erasing the knowledge that was destroying them. What kind of power is that? Not the power to kill, but the power to unmake, to edit existence itself. Do you truly wish to knock on a door behind which such a force resides?" But the null cascade was not a choice. It was an inevitability. The debate circled for hours, the pragmatic needs of the present warring with the deep-seated fears of the past. In the end, a compromise was reached, a decision born of desperation and a sliver of hope. They would not force passage. They would not send a fleet. They would send a single vessel, a diplomatic mission. They would go to the edge of the void, and for the first time in millennia, they would formally and humbly ask. They would ask for help, and in doing so, they would be forced to ask the question that had been left unasked for a reason. And the burden of this question, the responsibility of carrying the galaxy's plea and its terror, was placed upon the one who understood the stakes most deeply. It was placed upon Elder Kalen. The journey to the border of human space was a descent into a profound and unnerving quiet. The vessel, the Stellarch's Memory, was a Cathar archival ship, not a warship. It was designed for silent running, for deep space observation, for listening to the echoes of dying stars. It was a ship of scholars and diplomats, its corridors filled not with weapons, but with data crystals and meditation chambers. As they moved further from the bustling hyperlanes of the Concordance, the Uni. Verse outside the viewports grew simpler, darker. The chatter of interstellar communications faded. The quantum-entangled beacons of distant outposts winked out one by one, until there was nothing but the steady, ancient light of the stars themselves. Kalen spent most of his time in the forward observation dome, a crystalline bubble that offered an unobstructed view of the cosmos. He watched as the familiar constellations of concordant space receded behind them, replaced by the unfamiliar, unmapped patterns of the human frontier. His second-in-command, a young Cathar named Lyra, approached him, her movements precise and respectful. She was a product of the modern age, brilliant and analytical, but she had not lived through the echoes of the silent requiem. To her, this was a mission of discovery, not of dread. "Elder, we are approaching the demarcation line," she reported, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of excitement. "All long-range scans remain negative. No structures, no energy emissions, no vessels. It is exactly as the archives described it, a perfect void." Kalen did not turn. He kept his gaze fixed on the starfield ahead. "Perfection is often a sign of artifice, Lyra. Nature is chaotic, messy. A perfect void suggests that something has gone to great lengths to sweep it clean. What do your instincts tell you?" Lyra paused, her analytical mind processing the philosophical query. "My instincts are confused, Elder. The silence is unsettling. It feels less like an absence and more like a presence, a held breath, as if the entire region is listening to us." "Precisely," Kalen murmured. He had felt it too, a subtle pressure on his senses that was not physical but psychic. A feeling of being observed not by eyes or sensors, but by a vast, silent consciousness. It was the feeling a microbe might have moments before it realized it was on a specimen slide. The Stellark's memory slowed to a stop, its engines falling into a whisper-quiet standby mode. They had arrived. Before them lay no wall, no fence, no line of menacing weapons platforms. There was only space, indistinguishable from any other patch of empty cosmos, yet it felt as solid and impassable as a mountain of adamantium. This was the edge of the map, the place where the galaxy's knowledge ended. As per the Council's directive, they began to broadcast the Concordance's plea, a complex, multi-layered message of peace, desperation, and respect. It was encoded in every known form of communication, from standard radio waves to telepathic resonance, a desperate appeal cast into the silent abyss. They waited, hours turned into a day and the day into a cycle. The crew grew tense, the initial excitement curdling into a low-grade anxiety. The silence from the void was absolute, a perfect and unwavering refusal to acknowledge their existence. Highclaw Vorlag and his faction would be gloating. Their petition was being ignored. Their pleas were falling on deaf ears. Perhaps the humans were simply not there. Perhaps the entire mythos was a ghost story, a galactic superstition. Kalen felt a different fear. Not that they were being ignored, but that they were being evaluated, judged. Their plea, their entire civilization, weighed in a balance they could not see. He found himself meditating on the Xylo's text. The map is a mercy. What if the silence was also a mercy? What if a response was the most dangerous thing they could receive? Just as he was beginning to accept that they would receive no answer, it happened. Not a grand arrival of a fleet, not a booming voice from the heavens, but a simple, elegant change in their reality. Lyra gasped from her console. "Elder, you must see this." Kalen moved to her station. The main view screen showed the starfield before them unchanged, but the ship's internal sensors were reporting something impossible. A new object had appeared in their immediate vicinity. It was not on the screen because it was not reflecting any light. It was not emitting any energy. It was not displacing any spacetime. According to every instrument they possessed, it was not there. And yet the ship's proximity alerts were screaming. It was less than a kilometer from their hull. Then a voice spoke, not over the comms, but directly inside their minds. It was a human voice, calm and clear, without accent or inflection, as if it were the archetypal sound of language itself. "Your broadcast is acknowledged, Concordance vessel. Your plea has been heard. Please hold your position. We are coming to you." A moment later, the view screen flickered. A section of the blackness before them began to resolve. It was not decloaking in the conventional sense. It was as if a piece of the void itself was coalescing into a solid form, light bending around it in a way that defied known physics. A ship emerged, long and impossibly sleek, its hull a material so black it seemed to drink the light of the distant stars. It bore no markings, no viewpo. RTS, no visible weapon emplacements. It looked less like a machine built for travel and more like a shard of frozen night, a piece of the fundamental silence of the universe given shape and purpose. Kalen realized with a jolt of ice in his veins that the ship had been there the entire time. It had been waiting for them, perfectly hidden not by technology, but by a complete mastery over perception itself. A single shuttle detached from the vessel, moving toward them with an unnerving grace. It docked with the Stellark's memory without a single tremor, its airlock extending and sealing against their hull with a whisper-soft hiss. The Concordance protocol was clear. First contact was to be met with an open hand, but a prepared mind. Kalen and a small honor guard made their way to the airlock, their hearts pounding in a unison of awe and terror. The inner door slid open. Standing in the sterile white light of the docking tube was a single human. It was a female of advanced age by her species' standards. Her hair was stark white, her face a map of fine lines, but her eyes were clear and startlingly direct. She wore a simple, dark gray uniform devoid of rank or insignia. There was a profound stillness about her, a sense of immense calm that was more intimidating than any display of force. She was not armed. She was not flanked by guards. She was alone. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova," she said, her voice the same one they had heard in their minds, but now it was spoken aloud, carrying a quiet warmth that did nothing to quell the feeling of dread in Kalen's core. "Welcome to the border. I am here to answer your question." Kalen inclined his head, a gesture of formal Cathar respect. "Ambassador, I am Elder Kalen of the Cathar. On behalf of the Galactic Concordance, I thank you for receiving us. Our situation is desperate." "We are aware," Rostova said, her gaze sweeping over Kalen and his honor guard, her expression one of deep, abiding empathy. It was not the look of a superior being pitying a lesser one, but the look of a doctor observing a patient, already knowing the diagnosis and the difficult treatment required. "The null cascade is a symptom, not the disease. Your evacuation route is the least of your concerns. Please walk with me. What I have to show you cannot be adequately explained in words." She gestured for them to follow her, not into their ship, but into her shuttle. A wave of apprehension washed over the Cathar delegation. To board an unknown vessel under such circumstances was a monumental risk, but to refuse felt like a greater one. Kalen made a decision. He nodded to Lyra, signaling for her to remain in command, and he and two of his guards followed the human ambassador into the shuttle. The interior was as Spartan as the exterior. There were no controls, no consoles, only a few simple seats and a circular viewing port that currently showed the hull of their own ship. As the door hissed shut, the shuttle detached and began to move. But there was no sensation of acceleration, no vibration. The view in the port simply changed, the Stellarch's memory shrinking away with impossible speed as they moved deeper into the human void. The stars here were different. They seemed colder, their light thin and brittle. "Where are you taking us?" Kalen asked, his voice steady despite the unease that coiled within him. "To an archive," Rostova replied, her gaze fixed on the view ahead. "To the place where the map ends. We do not maintain a border of weapons, Elder Kalen. We maintain a border of knowledge, a quarantine of thought. You asked why our space is unmapped. It is because to map it, to even perceive it correctly, is to become infected by it." Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the shuttle's temperature. Infected by what? The ambassador turned her clear, sorrowful eyes upon him. "By a weapon that targets reality itself, a mimetic plague, a cognitohazard. You call the incident with the Xylos the Silent Requiem. A poetic title. We call it cognitive pruning, and it was a mercy. The Xylos expedition did not simply vanish. They encountered an idea. A piece of information so virulent, so fundamentally hostile to the architecture of a logical mind, that it began to unravel their civilization from the inside out. It spread through their communications, through their art, through their historical records. It was not a virus of the body, but a virus of the soul. It rewrites what is, what was, and what can be." The shuttle slowed, and ahead of them, a structure began to resolve out of the blackness. It was a space station of some kind, but it was like nothing Kalen had ever seen. It was a sphere of the same light-devouring material as the ship, but its surface was covered in slowly shifting geometric patterns that seemed to hurt the eyes if looked at directly. It gave off an aura of profound, ancient grief. "This is Watchtower Epsilon," Rostova said softly. "One of many, it is not. A fortress, it is a library, a hospital, and a tomb. This is where we study the plague. This is where we contain it, and this is where we brought the last of the Xylos." They docked, and the ambassador led them into the station. The interior was silent, the air still and cold. The corridors were long and bare, the walls inscribed with flowing lines of human text and complex mathematical formulae that Kalen's universal translator could not even begin to parse. They were not words, his mind realized, but conceptual anchors, patterns of thought designed to reinforce a stable reality against an invasive one. They passed sealed chambers, their thick armored doors marked with a single, stark symbol, a stylized human eye with a tear falling from it. The Xylos cartographers were the first to encounter it in this sector, Rostova explained, her voice echoing in the vast, empty halls. They were charting a nebula that to their instruments appeared to be a stellar nursery rich in exotic materials. But it was not a nebula. It was the corpse of something. A victim of the plague from a previous cycle, an entire ecosystem of thought that had been driven mad and consumed itself. The data the Xylos collected carried the infection. A single fractal image, a specific resonant frequency, that's all it took. She stopped before a large, shielded observation window looking into one of the sealed chambers. When their fleet stopped transmitting, we investigated. We found them adrift. The crews were still alive, but they were no longer sane. Their minds had been hollowed out, filled with the plague's logic. They were carving impossible shapes into the bulkheads, speaking in a language that unwound causality, weeping for memories of empires that had never existed. The infection was already spreading back to their homeworld through their entangled communicators. Kalen looked through the window. The chamber on the other side was not a prison cell. It was a perfect recreation of a Xylos meditation garden, complete with the crystalline flora and gentle light sculptures of their lost culture. Seated within it were beings he recognized from the archives as Xylos, their slender, insectoid forms perfectly still. They were not moving. They were not speaking. They were simply there. "Are they prisoners?" Lyra's adjutant, one of the guards, whispered, his voice trembling. "No," Rostova said, her own voice thick with an ancient sorrow. "They are monuments. The plague doesn't just kill, it erases. It was rewriting Xylos' history, their biology, their very place in the universe. If we had done nothing, their species would have vanished as if it had never been. Every record, every memory, every artifact gone. The galaxy would have a hole in it where the Xylos used to be. We couldn't stop the infection on a galactic scale without using unacceptable methods. So we did the only humane thing we could. We saved a remnant. We took their entire surviving population, those who had not yet been exposed, and brought them here to these sanctuaries. We severed their connection to the galaxy. And then we pruned the timeline. We, humanity, used our own conceptual tools to help the plague along its course within their space, accelerating the erasure, reinforcing the new, false history that their expedition had never existed. We guided the universal consensus to forget them, to preserve the stability of the whole. It was the most difficult thing our species has ever done. To save them, we had to make the galaxy forget them, but we remember. We stand watch over their culture, their memory, their essence. We became their living archive. The full weight of the truth crashed down on Kalen. The blank space on the map, the silent requiem, the fear. It was not a story of human aggression, but of a sacrifice so complete, so profound, that the concordance could not even comprehend its scale. The humans were not isolationists. They were wardens. They were the silent, unthanked guardians of galactic sanity, standing eternal vigil over a horror that could unmake gods. "The map is a mercy," Kalen said, the words of the Xylos cartographer finally making a terrible, perfect sense. "You left it blank as a kindness, to keep us from looking, to keep us safe." "Yes," Rostova affirmed. "Ignorance is the first and last line of defense against this enemy. An enemy you cannot fight, you cannot see, and you cannot understand. An enemy that wins the moment you acknowledge its existence. We carry the burden of knowing so that the rest of you do not have to." She then led them to the heart of the watchtower, a spherical chamber where a captured, contained sample of the cognito hazard was being studied. It was not visible to the naked eye. It existed only as a distortion in the chamber's center, a place where logic seemed to fray at the edges. Consoles around the room displayed streams of data that made Kalen's mind ache, cascading paradoxes, equations that proved their own. Falsehood and sensor readings that perpetually contradicted themselves. "We have studied it for centuries," Rostova said, her hand resting on a cool, dark console. "We have learned its nature. It is a weapon, an informational virus engineered to dismantle sentient thought. It operates on the principle of conceptual collapse. It introduces a core paradox into a civilization's foundational logic, their mathematics, their philosophy, their art. Once the paradox takes root, the culture begins to doubt its own truths, and it tears itself apart from the inside, memory by memory, until it ceases to be a coherent concept." She turned to face him, her expression grim. "The null cascade you are fleeing, it is not a natural phenomenon. It is the plague at work on a cosmological scale. It is not destroying stars with energy, but with information. It is convincing them that the physical laws that sustain their fusion no longer apply. It is persuading them to die. Your evacuation route will not save you, Elder Kalen. You are not running from a wave. You are running from a whisper that is spreading through the very fabric of the universe." The revelation was staggering, a paradigm shift that shattered Kalen's understanding of the cosmos. The Concordance was facing not an extinction event, but a conversion event. A war being waged not for territory or resources, but for the right to exist at all. Why, Kalen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Who would create such a thing? Rostova's gaze drifted from the contained anomaly to the stardusted blackness visible through a nearby viewport. Her face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something beyond sorrow and duty. It was a deep, chilling weariness, the look of a soldier who has been on watch for 1,000 years. That is the question we have been asking ourselves since we first encountered it, she said. We believe it was a weapon used in an ancient war, a conflict on a scale we can barely imagine, fought by beings for whom reality itself was a malleable resource. The weapon was deployed, and it seems the user either lost control of it, or they won so completely that they no longer exist to turn it off. For eons, it has been dormant, a lingering echo in the dark, but something has begun to stir it. To awaken it, she activated a holographic display. It showed a map not of their galaxy, but of the vast, cold void between the galaxies. In the far distance, a faint, repeating signal was highlighted. It was impossibly ancient, its waveform stretched and degraded by its long journey across intergalactic space. We have been monitoring this for centuries, Rostova explained. It is a signal, a simple, repeating carrier wave. We believe it may be a control signal or perhaps a beacon. It is not aimed at our galaxy, but it is passing through it, and its resonance is interacting with the dormant plague fields, causing them to flare up like embers in a breeze. The null cascade is the first major symptom. It will not be the last. Kalen stared at the signal's point of origin, a location so far outside their own galactic cluster that it was almost meaningless. It was a message from beyond, a testament to a power so vast and so terrifyingly alien that the combined might of the Concordance felt like dust motes in a hurricane. Humanity had not just been guarding a prison. They had been watching the horizon, waiting for the jailers to return. Cannot fight this alone, Rostova said, her voice dropping the last veil of diplomatic reserve, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of their situation. We have the knowledge, the conceptual tools, the experience of containing the plague, but we are a single species. We have spent our energy and our resources on this silent watch. The sheer scale of this new awakening, it is beyond our capacity to contain on our own. The null cascade is just the beginning. Soon, there will be outbreaks across the galaxy. Entire species will begin to unravel. We need help. Not your ships or your weapons. We need your minds. We need your stability. We need the Concordance to hold firm, to become a bulwark of sanity while we work to counteract the signal. Kalen was silent for a long time, his mind reeling with the enormity of what he had been shown. The arrogance of the Concordance, the petty squabbles over territory and resources, the posturing of species like the Vorlag, it all seemed so laughably insignificant now. They had been children playing in a sandbox, utterly oblivious to the tidal wave of cosmic horror that was about to wash them all away. And the humans, the quiet, reclusive, underestimated humans, had been the adults in the room, silently maintaining the walls that kept the darkness at bay. You have borne this burden alone for too long, Kalen said finally, his voice filled with a newfound respect that bordered on reverence. The Concordance, we were blind. We mistook your vigilance for indifference, your mercy for weakness. That W. It'll change. I will return to the Lumina chamber. I will show them the truth. You will have your allies. Ambassador Rostova gave him a small, sad smile. It was not a smile of triumph, but of relief. The relief of a sentinel who, after a long and lonely watch, finally hears the footsteps of the changing of the guard. I hope so, Elder Kalen, for all our sakes. The long night is coming. The return journey to the Stellarch's memory was conducted in a heavy, contemplative silence. Kalen now understood the human ship's unsettling design, its ability to hide from perception. It was not a stealth system for combat, but a necessary defense. To be seen by the wrong thing was to be targeted. To be known was to be undone. The human vessel did not just move through space. It moved through understanding, carefully editing its own presence to avoid attracting the attention of the true horrors of the void. When he was back aboard his own ship, Kalen immediately convened a secure, priority channel to the Concordance Elder Council. He did not transmit a report. He transmitted an experience. With the human's permission, he sent a carefully shielded data packet, not containing the hazard itself, but a simulation of its effects, a glimpse into the conceptual abyss they guarded. He sent the image of the serene Xylos, trapped in their eternal, remembered garden. He sent the waveform of the intergalactic signal. And he sent the 5 words that had haunted him, now imbued with their full, terrifying meaning. The map is a mercy. The reaction from the Lumina chamber was not one of panic or disbelief. It was one of profound, world-altering silence. The kind of silence that follows a revelation so fundamental it realigns the axis of a civilization. The brash pronouncements of Hyclaw Vorlag were gone, replaced by a stunned, horrified stillness. The wavering gravity fields of the Glyptons solidified into a pattern of grim resolve. The telepathic presence of the Lumina, which had been a symphony of concern, became a single, focused chord of unwavering purpose. Kalen stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the holographic image of the chamber. He did not need to speak. The evidence spoke for itself. He had brought back not an answer, but a context, a new understanding of the universe that was both terrifying and clarifying. They were not alone, but what was with them in the dark was not a rival or a competitor. It was a question that could end all answers. Hyclaw Vorlag was the first to break the silence. His voice, once grating with arrogance, was now low and humbled. "We were children," he scraped, the admission a physical effort. "We saw a locked door and presumed it was because of treasure. We never imagined it was locked to protect us from what was inside. Elder Kalen, Ambassador Rostova, the Vorlag offer our fleets, our worlds, our lives, command us." It was an unprecedented capitulation, a complete reversal from a species defined by its pride. And it was echoed by every other member of the Concordance. The old political divisions, the ancient rivalries, they all melted away in the face of a threat that targeted not their bodies or their worlds, but their very right to have a history. A new alliance was forged in that moment, not of convenience or of conquest, but of shared, desperate existence. Humanity, the silent outsider, was unanimously invited to lead them. Ambassador Rostova's face appeared on the main view screen, her calm, weary expression broadcast to the entire Concordance. She accepted their pledge not with triumph, but with solemn gratitude. "We do not seek to command you," she said, her voice echoing in the grand chamber. "We seek to stand with you. We will share our knowledge, our conceptual tools. We will teach you how to reinforce your realities, how to build cognitive firewalls. In return, we need you to be the shield. Your fleets will not fight the plague. They will protect the worlds that we are trying to save. They will enforce the quarantines. They will be the guardians of the physical realm, while we wage the war in the realm of thought." And so a new age began. The great evacuation was no longer a panicked flight, but a strategic, orderly withdrawal, a consolidation of life and memory into designated sanctuary worlds, reinforced by human conceptual technology. The Vorlag fleets, once instruments of conquest, became the shepherds of this grand migration, their aggression channeled into a fierce, protective duty. The Glyptons used their mastery of gravitational engineering to help move not just populations, but entire celestial bodies, shielding them from the Cascade's path. The Cathar became the archivists of the new alliance, working with the humans to create redundant, conceptually shielded records of every species, ensuring that no one could ever be pruned from existence again. Kalen remained on the frontier, his ship now the flagship of the first joint human concordance fleet. He stood on his observation deck, looking at the grand stellar cartography, which was now being actively and carefully updated. The blank space was no longer empty. It was being filled in slowly with the symbols of watchtowers, of quarantine zones, of the silent, lonely sanctuaries that held the memory of the Xylos. It was becoming a map not of what was known, but of what was protected. He gazed out at the human void, which no longer felt empty or terrifying. It felt sacred. It was a monument to a promise kept for millennia. He thought of humanity, of their quiet strength, their profound and sorrowful ethics. They had seen the true face of the universe and had not flinched. They had not sought power or glory. They had simply accepted their duty. They had chosen to become the galaxy's memory, its conscience, its silent, eternal guardians. The map had stopped at their space, left unasked for a reason. And the reason he now knew was not fear. It was love. A love for existence itself, so fierce and so absolute that it was willing to bear an infinite burden in complete, unacknowledged silence. The map was a mercy, yes, but it was also a testament. A testament to the quiet, unassuming species that had taught a galaxy of elder races the true meaning of strength. Not the power to conquer, but the will to protect, the courage to remember, and the wisdom to stand watch over the dark. The long night was indeed coming, but for the first time in millennia, they would not face it alone.